Yeah, the Buddha's noble quest, the Arya Pariyesana. So we're basing this series, well, in a sense, the whole year on the Arya Pariyesana Sutta. And so leading up particularly to Buddha Day in May, which will be the culmination of this particular series of events, of evenings. We're looking at the Buddha and his story. And yes, so got to the point where the Buddha. So last week I talked about the Buddha's or Siddhartha, as he was then, seeking out the two teachers. So having left home and be standing there on the edge of a trackless forest, not knowing really what to do next. So he sought out two teachers, very quickly mastered what they had to teach him, but realized that what they were teaching it wasn't the sort of the consummation of the spiritual life. It wasn't going to take him all the way. It wasn't going to lead to the permanent eradication of suffering. So he left them, and we meet him today sort of wandering away from the teachers onto the next phase. Now, this particular version of the story skips over all of the stuff about asceticism, and it goes straight to his discovery of a place with a lovely river running through it and a large spreading peepal tree, a fig tree, becomes known as the Bodhi tree. And so he finds this place. You don't get the impression he had a strong sense of where he was going to end up, but he ended up at this very pleasant spot, as I said, with this lovely river, this tree for shade and shelter. And he thought to himself, well, this looks like a good place for as the sutta has it, for a clansman intent on striving. So he just decided he's just going to stay there, and he's just going to sit there and meditate until something happens. And this got me thinking about conditions, and the importance of positive conditions and setting the scene, so setting yourself up for practice, and the importance of beauty and the importance of nature. And so I've got some musings about setting yourself up, how you set yourself up for practice in a way that's conducive. Yeah, so in a way, when we come here and when we salute the shrine and we recite the refuges and precepts, that's what we're doing, aren't we? We're entering into a ritual space, which is different. We're putting down our sort of normal preoccupations, and for the duration of this evening, leaving normal life behind and entering into a ritual space and entering into a relationship with something higher, with something of ultimate value, whatever that happens to be for you. So for many of us, or perhaps most of us, it would be the three jewels of refuge, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. Particularly the Dharma, the Buddha, so sitting there on the shrine. Yeah, so it's an important sort of way of establishing that ritual space, of setting up positive conditions. So yeah, it got me thinking about that whole area. And I was just chatting to Lee just before. I'm sure he won't mind me mentioning this, that he sort of said something that I'd remembered he'd said in the past, that he was in a really good groove with his meditation practice. Actually lighting a candle and sort of, I don't remember if you recited verses, I can't remember what you said, but anyway, creating sort of some ritual conditions to meditate, rather than just, throwing himself on the sofa for 10 minutes before doing something else, and finding that is much more conducive to a good meditation. So I've been reflecting on why that is the case as well. So I'm just going to share some thoughts with you. And then we'll have an opportunity to talk about conditions, our conditions for practice, and what we do, or what we can do to set up conditions to meet the Kalyana, the beautiful, the higher, or the highest in our lives. Yeah, so what do we do to set ourselves up for practice? Yeah, so there's two possible, there are sort of two scenarios, I suppose, one of which is perhaps a bit extreme, that we may recognize from when we are setting ourselves up for meditation practice. So one is, you might come in from work, you're a bit tired, or you've been doing something, you're a little bit sort of tired, a bit kind of frazzled from the day, and you know, a bit full of stimulation and input, and maybe you'd switch on the news and watch a bit of news or watch a bit of telly to unwind. And then you think to yourself, oh, well, maybe I should do a bit of meditation. So you turn off the telly, sit on the sofa, yeah, and sort of try to maybe do the mindfulness of breathing. And I don't know about you, but I would normally find under those circumstances that one of two things would happen. I'd either be out like a light, or my mind would be regurgitating everything that it had sort of taken in during the course of the day. I'd be very distracted, yeah. So, and that probably wouldn't be very conducive, and I probably wouldn't bother for very long trying to meditate under those conditions. Yeah, so that's one possible meditation scenario that you may recognize. And here's another one. So you let's say you get up in the morning. So you go to bed at a reasonable hour the previous night so that you can get up quite early to meditate. You've given yourself time. So you might go to your meditation room and wherever that is, and you make sure that the space is orderly, that the space is everything's in order, that the flowers are fresh, that the floor is hoovered or swept. There are candles, you know, that everything is just so. And then you might light your candles, sit yourself mindfully down on your cushion or chair or whatever it is before the shrine with the candles lit, compose yourself, and then maybe you'd chant something. Maybe you'd chant the refuges and precepts or a mantra or read a text or something. And you might well find, as I usually do when I prepare in that way, that somehow it's much more kind of effortless or natural to sort of slip into a meditative state, because you've created that, you've entered into a ritual space and acknowledged that you're crossing a threshold, as it were. So what's happening when we're saluting the shrine and when we're setting ourselves up for meditation, when we're acknowledging the Buddha, say, I think, well, one of the things that had occurred to me that's happening is that you're entering into a relationship, as I think I said before, you're entering into a relationship with the higher, with the highest values, with the Buddha. So you're creating a space in which that relationship can arise. And when you enter into a relationship with somebody, so when you meet a friend, anyway, you gravitate towards them, you get interested in them, don't you? You sort of put your own concerns and your preoccupations aside to be with that person. Yeah. So when you meet a friend or somebody you respect, you just sort of put yourself down a bit. So when you enter into communication with somebody, you put yourself and your preoccupations and your kind of, your normal life down. And that's what I think we do when we enter into this sacred space. And it got me thinking that in a way, meditation is a bit like that. It's about sort of putting us down. It's about putting ourselves down. Yeah. So when we're entering into a sort of different space, and we're putting our normal concerns, our normal mind to one side. So, it's not as if there's no striving and there's no application of will. Of course there is. But there's also a sense of meditation as letting go. We can look at meditation as letting go into the beautiful, into what is of value, into what is of worth. Yeah, into what I call the Kalyana, which means the beautiful, the lovely. Yeah, so we're entering into a relationship with the beautiful and the lovely. So much of our lives, or much of my life, is about sort of striving and getting things done and using things to get to the end I want to get to. So much of my life is quite instrumental. It's quite focused on sort of tasks and getting things done and getting my way and fulfilling my agenda. Yeah. So to sort of get the things done I want to done. But I think, and we can approach meditation in that way. That meditation is a thing to get done, to sort of further my development agenda, if you like. But we could also look at meditation, as I said, as a way of just sort of letting go of that and entering into depths, entering into a sort of a stillness which is away from all of that striving and all of that me furthering my agenda. Yeah. It's almost as it's not about us as we are, as I am, trying to get somewhere. It's about putting that down. Yeah. So you could almost say in some senses that meditation is a bit useless, or it can be useless. It doesn't have to sort of serve a purpose. I don't have to kind of achieve anything when I'm meditating other than just opening up to my own depths, opening up to what's there, opening up to what's present. Yeah, so we don't have to look at meditation necessarily as furthering a life goal. We can look at it as an opportunity just to be, just to let go. So if there's too much willfulness in our meditation practice, I mean, I don't know if you tend to be willful meditators or very relaxed meditators, but I know from experience that the application of will in the way that we normally apply our will when we want to get something done can be quite counterproductive in meditation. It can lead to things being a bit forced and our concentration, such as it is, can be quite brittle. Yeah. So there's something about approaching the sacred space and letting go of that willfulness, which I think is, what we can look at the saluting the shrine and our opening rituals as letting go of our own particular self-will, letting go of our agenda, and just really trying to be and trying to experience what it is to be alive right now. So kind of almost like, meditation as being sort of pointless, if you like. I sort of get pointlessness in, and there we are. Yeah, so there being too strong a sense of me and mine to my, my practice, my development to the story, then in some ways, that can be problematic. If there's too much will, sort of will-driven striving in our practice, then it can get a bit tense and a bit narrow, can't it? And a bit sort of headachy. Yeah. Yeah. So something about opening up a space where we don't have to do that, where we can let go of ourselves, we can put ourselves and our will, our ego-driven desire for things to happen to one side. So when the Buddha sat down, or when Siddhartha sat down under that tree, of course he talks about striving. So the text talks about striving, but at the same time, he had experienced what it was like to strive with a fierce application of will in all those years of ascetic practice when he virtually starved himself to death. I tend to think of that as being the extreme application of will to sort of overcome the body, to try and break his body, to sort of set his spirit free. And after 6 years of that, or however long it was, he discovered that didn't work. So when he came to this place and was recovering from all the exertions, taking solid food and nourishment, he discovered a different way. He had a vision. He recalled something from his childhood, which was a sort of spontaneous experience of deep absorption, relaxation, lightness that he'd experienced when he was a boy. And then he saw in that, perhaps that was the path that he needed to take, a different way of approaching absorption, a different way of going deeper, one which involved letting go and relaxation as much as it did striving. So he was striving, he wanted something to happen, but he wasn't striving in that sort of willful sense of striving. Yeah, and there is a story in the Pali Canon, in the Udana, that sort of illustrates this a bit, which I will tell you. And it concerns a monk called Meghiya. Now, Meghiya is a very young, well, I imagine him as being a very young, he's a newly ordained monk, perhaps, freshly shaven, new robes, very keen, very ardent, very zealous, and he's with the Buddha. And just imagine that for a moment. Just imagine you're with the Buddha. Okay, I mean, you're actually with the Buddha in person. But Meghiya, being young and a bit sort of and keen and ardent, he earlier in the day he spotted this delightful mango grove, And he thinks to himself, oh, that would be a really great place to go and meditate. I'm sure I'd do really well if I just went in that mango grove and meditated. So he says to the Buddha, can I go and meditate in that mango grove? Not in those words, but that's the sort of basic message. Yeah, he says to the Buddha, you've achieved everything there is to achieve, but I haven't. And I'd really like to go and meditate in that mango grove. I'm sure it would be great. And the Buddha says to him, well, then if you leave, I'll be alone. So can you just wait until another bhikkhu turns up and then you can go? But then Meghiya sort of doesn't listen to that, and he repeats his request to go and sit in the mango grove. And the Buddha again says, yeah, but if you go, I'll be on my own. And wouldn't it be better just to wait for another bhikkhu to show up and then you could go? And then Meghiya asks a third time. And the Buddha says, as was customary, if somebody asked the Buddha something 3 times, he would usually relent. And the Buddha goes, all right then, yeah, if you must do what you think it is time to do. So Meghiya goes off to this mango grove and sets himself up with great expectation of dhyana and wonderful things happening. But instead he is assailed by greed, hatred and delusion, basically. So he can't meditate for toffee. So he sits there in this wonderful mango grove, not be able to meditate for toffee, and then he gives up eventually. And he goes back to the Buddha and he said, it was really weird, it was such a lovely place, but here was I sat there with my mind full of greed, hatred and delusion. At which the Buddha sort of proceeds to tell him gives him a whole bunch of really sage advice about what you should actually do. Yeah, one of which is kind of code for, well, if you're with the Buddha, then you should probably just sort of be with the Buddha and be receptive to the Buddha, because, what an opportunity, and a whole bunch of other things. But I think what that illustrates is, again, it's this sort of approach to practice where you take your normal kind of will-driven agenda of striving into your spiritual life. And again, the consequences can be problematic. So I guess what I'm saying is that, we come to this place, or we sit down to meditate, and we sort of need to kind of adopt a different approach. Well, I think it's useful to adopt a different approach. But I'm not saying necessarily that one shouldn't try at all and should just drift and sink. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm suggesting is that as part of our kind of preparation for meditation and for practice, we need to sort of set up conditions where we can cross that threshold. We can put those things down. We can put our normal mode of operating in the world down and just be receptive. Yeah. And I started thinking about nature, because the Buddha's, he's in nature, of course. I mean, he spent his whole life pretty much outdoors and in the natural world, and it was an important sort of context for him. And I was thinking about nature. So what's the thing about nature? And in a way, nature is completely sort of, we need to approach nature, I think, in a way that it is useless, that we're not sort of trying to make something of it, or force it to be something, or force it to serve our agenda. Yeah, we shouldn't we spend a lot of our lives, don't we, kind of using things. The things have an instrumental value. And of course, that's kind of important and necessary in life, that we need to get things done. So, but I think when it comes to the natural world, again, the approach of kind of using nature for our particular purposes to sort of achieve particular ends can be pretty dangerous. I mean, in many ways, that's why I guess the planet is in the mess that it is in, because we do that. We take this appropriative kind of utilitarian attitude from our lives into our relationship with the natural world. Whereas I think one of the great things about the natural world is we can just go there and just kind of accept that it is as it is, and not try and use it for anything in particular, and kind of let go again. So again, we come back to that sense of sort of letting go. Yeah, so one of the things about being in nature is that, we don't have to do anything with it. We can just be in it and experience its beauty and allow that to work on us. So there's something about, Yeah, so the theme that's emerged for me for all of this is putting down our normal way of being. Yeah. So whether we're sitting down to meditate, so setting up conditions which give us that opportunity to enter into a different sort of relationship with life, with ourselves, that isn't based on ego-driven striving. Yes, they keep shutting down on. Yeah. That's kind of what I wanted to say, really. Yeah.